Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
This is a great day for the children of our Commonwealth.
Yes, it is.
And a great day for the Senate and all of you folks here who participated in this process. I first want to thank the Senate President. You know, when he came to me in 2015, the end of 2015, he said he had this idea for this proposal, for this blueprint, for the framework going forward, how are we going to put our kids first in the Commonwealth. I thought it was a great idea, and I hope that he chose me to lead it, and he did. So I want to thank him for doing that, and thank him for his vision of always protecting all of our kids throughout the Commonwealth. And we took that charge, and we moved forward, and it took a little while, because we wanted to get it right. And I want to thank the members of the Kids First Initiative. Some are here, and some are not. They have previous engagements, but I want to list their names because they all played a part in what we have in front of you today. We have Senators Sonia Chang-Diaz, Jennifer Flanagan, Jason Lewis, Pat Jalen, James Welch, Joan Lovely, Linda DeSanafori, Eric Lesser, and Richard Ross. I want to thank them for all of their input and their work and their staff as well. You know, some of you have heard me say this before, but you want to surround yourself with people who are smarter than you are. And in this case, I definitely have. And I want to thank three people in particular who have their handprint on this document. And that is my Chief of Staff, Christy Ghetto-Young, who a lot of you know and have worked out. And the Senate President's staff, and two individuals that worked hard on this as well, and Anna Friedman and Jim DiTullio. And I'll be doing thank yous later on at the end, but I also want to just recognize the most important people behind me, the third graders from the Whittier School in the city of Everett. So when the Senate President came to us and said we want to do this framework, this vision going forward, we sat down and we laid out a plan. We wanted to do a holistic approach, integrated approach to educating our kids and giving them all the services and all the needs that they would have going forward to be successful in early childhood and beyond. And we were supporting children, families, educators, and community leaders. And as the Senate President said, this is not legislation, this is not an omnibus bill. This is not a one-year effort. This is not going to happen overnight in this year's budget. This is a multi-year plan to put our kids first and do all that we can to put them in a position to succeed going forward as productive citizens of our Commonwealth and our country. And this report it was daunting in the beginning, obviously, because you're trying to figure out what direction you're going in. But we broke it down to 4 parts. And you'll see that in front of you, and we have some recommendations that you can all read later on. But 4 parts, and the first part was access. If you are not in a classroom, if you're not in a program, if you're not getting services or after-school programming, then you cannot take advantage of that. Access is key. And low-income kids hear over 30 million less words than their wealthy peers by age 3. Early education, after-school program, out-of-school programs, and services are critical to close that gap. Our next step was quality. If you don't have quality educators, you can have the best schools, but you need those educators who are trained well and they're qualified in the classroom, and compensate them well as well. That is a critical component of this because 39% of our early educators are on public assistance. That is a shame. They're educating our kids, but they can't support their own families. And we're going to change that. And because of that, the turnover rate for early educators is 30%. And we know continuity and consistency is key to that early age group. We need qualified teachers who are making careers out of this, not just a first step in their academic career and their career going forward. This should be a career for early educators. Our next group is readiness. We always hear the great equalizer is education. But if a child is not ready to learn, then they're not going to benefit from what we have in front of them. You can have the best schools, the best educators, the best technology, the best facilities, but if a child comes to school hungry, or is experiencing trauma at home, or has barriers put in front of them, they are not ready to learn in the best environment that we put them in. We have to make sure that we could break down those barriers, and this report will show us how to do that. This blueprint, it's not a report, this blueprint will show us how to do that. And the last but not least, integration. How do we bring all this together? And, you know, we have a lot of good things happening in this Commonwealth for kids and for our citizens. We do well in a lot of areas, but a lot of these areas are not integrated with each other. They're not talking to each other. You know, we always talk about the SNAP gap, where our families are on mass health and they could qualify for other programs, they just don't know it because nothing is connected. In terms of getting assistance with food. If you're on mass health, there's a good bet you qualify for the SNAP benefit as well. But some families don't know that. And we're going to integrate all these programs. So as you can see, it is a big proposal going forward. There's a lot in this report, blueprint, I keep saying report. I want everybody behind me, do not say report, and I'm saying it more than anybody else. But this vision going forward is important to finally put our kids first. We talk about it all the time, don't we? There isn't one person in the world that's against early education, against putting kids first. We're in the same spot we were 15 years ago in a lot of these priorities. It's time to change that and truly put kids first. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Chris Martes, President and CEO of Strategy for Children. Dr. Martes is a former teacher, principal, and superintendent of schools in several communities. In 2008, he was honored as Superintendent of the Year by the American Association of School Administrators. He was also director of the Mass Association for School Superintendents. He has a master's degree in education and a PhD in curriculum, instruction, and school administration. And he works closely with Strategy for Children. We work closely with Strategy for Children. They are real leaders in early education in our state. And I am pleased to welcome to the podium, Chris Martes.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, Senators, for all the work that you've accomplished in this blueprint. If I were speaking not too long ago, I might say, this blueprint is huge, but I actually don't use that word anymore. But I will say that this blueprint is outstanding. And I'll tell you why from both vantage points that the Senator just described to me. I've gotten into this early education work over the last 3 years when I didn't really retire as well as I thought I might, and have really learned a lot. And this report speaks to much of what we talk about every day at Strategies for Children. And we have the opportunity to work in communities across the Commonwealth, and we see how important it is to look at those 4 pillars and see that readiness and that access. We also see, surprisingly, it looks surprising to me, we also see that there are many children in our cities and communities, not just cities, also in our communities who are not in any program as a 3 or 4-year-old and who come to kindergarten not ready to learn. And this report speaks really well to that. One of the things that 20 years ago when I was working in the ed reform in the K-12 space, one of my friends and colleagues who's going to speak later, Paul Revel, said, one of the things we didn't do was didn't do anything with time. We still had the same 180 days, 6 to 7 hours a day. I know people have expanded it in different places, but we haven't been able to do that. This blueprint expands time and expands it into the early ed space where the research is critical, it's believable, it's important, and it's something that our Commonwealth is better than and should be able to figure this out. So we at Strategies for Children spend a lot of time and effort on this. We know how important that return on investment is. Other people will speak more to that today, I'm sure. But we think it's critical that the Senate has taken this on. We know that the House has been supportive of this. We hope that you folks will work well together in order to really make an impact, because our Commonwealth deserves this. Our teachers, our private providers, our public providers, and particularly our students, our children, and their families deserve this. To me, this is the next phase of education reform, and we did a pretty good job in that first phase. This is even more important and more critical. So again, I want to thank all the senators for doing all of this work. I want to pledge that Strategies for Children will always be there to help as you move this blueprint forward. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Chris. And it's great having partners like you for our kids. And I also want to mention that, before I bring up our next speaker, there was a component to this blueprint that I wanted to highlight. And that is the critical third grade reading level. We all know that's an indicator of success going forward. We have tremendous educators in our schools and our programs who are working very hard to make this happen. And we have to give them the resources to make it happen. We can't just expect this to happen overnight without giving them the critical services they need. So we have proposed in this blueprint, and to be honest with you, we haven't been doing a good job, right? So there's 40% of our kids that are not reading at grade level in third grade. 15 years, that number has not changed. We can either continue doing what we're doing and getting the same result, not so good, or we can move the needle. And through this blueprint, we are proposing to cut that number in half, from 40% to only 20% by 2020. The big moment I screwed it up, the big moment. We are proposing to cut that number in half by 2027. 2027, we will bring that number, cut that number in half for our third grading level. That is a big component of this blueprint going forward. And next speaker needs no introduction when it comes to educating our kids. And that is our Senate Chair of Education, Sonia Chang-Diaz. And she is a parent, she's a former educator, and she can talk about this stuff in her sleep. And I want to thank her for all of her help and her guidance as well during this process. Our leader when it comes to education, Senator Sonia Chang-Diaz.
All right. Nobody's asleep this morning, right? All right. So I'm here to talk about the early education components of this blueprint. And based on what you've just heard from Senator DiDomenico, both about our failure as a state to move the needle an inch over the last 15 years on third grade reading proficiency, which is a huge demerit for us as a state. Not an inch in 15 years. And what you've heard about the tremendous impact that early education can have. It should not be a surprise to anyone. What you see in this blueprint is nothing that will look like nibbling around the edges. This blueprint commits us to going where the science points us. And in the short-term priorities for early education, we make a bold recommendation that we need to completely eliminate, not just reduce it by a little bit here and there, we need to completely eliminate the wait list for low-income early education and care in Massachusetts. And we propose to do that in the short term for 0 to 5-year-olds in particular. And then secondly, the blueprint also proposes that we integrate early education for 2.9-year-olds plus into our core understanding of what constitutes public education. I'm going to say a little bit more about both of those things. First, the wait list. We have a lot of wait lists in Massachusetts. The wait list for early education for low-income 0 to 5-year-olds, just 0 to 5-year-olds, is 15,000. If you include up to 12-year-olds for after-school and out-of-school time, the wait list grows to 24,000 statewide. And that's with the access to the list actually being closed. So who knows how many people don't even bother applying to get onto that wait list because there's no hope of getting a spot right now. For context, the charter seat wait list statewide is 29,000, and that's regardless of income level. The science is clear and overwhelming that the presence or the absence of high-quality early education is an enormous lever, the biggest lever that we know of, for determining life outcomes for a person. We have it from a Nobel Prize-winning economist, that every dollar we invest in high quality early education and care yields us a 13% annual. Does anyone have a 13% dependable rate of return on their retirement account? Anyone here? Come see me if you do, because I'd like to know what you're investing in. But we know we get a 13% annual compounding rate of return on every dollar that we put into early education for the taxpayer. Conversely, if you're sitting on that wait list, or you didn't put yourself on the wait list in the first place, because what's the point right now? You are getting nothing. And you're generating a big fat liability for the Commonwealth, as you will hear in just a few minutes from an early educator, Colleen Labby, and from Sheriff Contusion. It is madness. It's just simply madness for us as a state to stare at those numbers, those liability numbers and those return on investment numbers, and then just let the wait list sit there, stretching on into the future. And that's why the Kids First Blueprint sets the short-term benchmark of not just taking a bite out of that wait list for 0 to 5-year-olds, but eliminating it altogether. Second, the blueprint prescribes that we need to incorporate early education into the way that we think about the core public good of education, and thus how we finance it and ensure access to it. I want you to think back, maybe a century and a half ago. There was a time when K through 12 education used to be viewed as the purview and the privilege of the wealthy. And we have long since come to recognize that it is a public good, that K through 12 education is something that we do together as taxpayers because it yields enormous benefits to the society as a whole, not just to the individual. And we know now that the early education years are fundamental to the success of that endeavor. So instead of inventing a new wheel, the Kids First Blueprint recommends that we simply integrate early education from age 2.9 forward into our Chapter 70 financing system in order to efficiently ensure universal access. We have a model for how to do this already through the Preschool Expansion Grant Program that has been federally funded for the last few years. It's time to bring that model to scale.